A Walk in the Woods. Paulus meets Pieck. I was an eyewitness and, to some extent, a participant in the famous meeting of the German Communist Party chairman in exile Wilhelm Pieck and Field Marshal Paulus at the end of June 1943. You should have seen Paulus' confusion when this energetic, broad-shouldered, grey-haired man strode into his room and identified himself. Member of the Reichstag, Pieck. He immediately offered to talk about the fate of the German people and homeland. The Field Marshal, who less than 6 months before commanded the largest force aiming to destroy Communist Russia, hesitated noticeably, wondering whether to accept the offer. On the one hand, traditional notions of an officer's honour, and, on the other, sincere pain about his own country, plunged by Hitler into an abyss of disasters. It was very noticeable how difficult it was for Paulus to maintain his usual countenance. He began the conversation dryly, outwardly reluctant, and even demonstrating hostility, trying to refute with one unique statement all the arguments provided by his interlocutor. I am a soldier, brought up under the terms of military honour, and if I can't fight along with my brothers in arms, then, as a prisoner of war, I must be silent. It is my duty to the fatherland and to the army. But there was an irresistible logic in the words of Wilhelm Pieck. He said, "A lot separates us. We will probably never think alike and look at things in the same way, but there is something that unites us. We are both German and we love Germany. There is only one way of salvation, to overthrow Hitler and immediately end this war." Later, the atmosphere eased, and the conversation turned to the past. You, Field Marshal, like hundreds of thousands of other Germans, would not have been captured if you had not obediently followed Hitler, said Pieck. I am an old soldier, Mr. Pieck, and all my life I have unquestioningly followed the orders of my commanders. I believed the head of the German state, and my commander-in-chief. I believed this, even amid the horrors of the Stalingrad cauldron. It was very difficult for me to assume that the head of state could deceive his people. So, you did not try to analyze Hitler's goals in depth, and the governing methods of the Nazi leadership? After all, even before 1933, we communists warned the German people that Hitler's coming to power means war, and war means disaster. Has Stalingrad taught you nothing? Paulus was visibly nervous. He did not find sufficiently convincing arguments with which to answer. In different variations, he repeated, "We are soldiers, we are far from politics. The soldier must obey implicitly." Thus, Paulus locked in his defence. But Wilhelm Pieck was an experienced and skilled polemicist. He refuted Paulus's assertion that the military was apolitical and indifferent to politics. He reminded Paulus that it was the generals who once helped the Nazis seize power in Germany and supported the aggressive course of Hitler's politics on the eve of World War II. The Wehrmacht was the main driving force behind the policy of aggression and violence. If the generals had united and told Hitler no, then your Fuehrer would have been powerless. Facing these arguments, Paulus ceased referring to the non-political nature of the Wehrmacht. Now he was trying to prove that the commanders of the Nazi army could not intervene in Hitler's orders because of their low awareness and poor knowledge. They told me that the Soviet Union was preparing to attack Germany, and I believed that. And I believed in the High Command when I received orders to continue the resistance at Stalingrad, far from everything. Although, in December 1942, it did seem hopeless to me. Gradually, Paulus' defences began to reveal large cracks. In the end, he was forced, albeit with reservations, to admit that he was an obedient instrument in the hands of the Nazi leadership and was responsible for the loss of hundreds of thousands of men. Pieck then gave the conversation a more positive aspect. We need now to look not into the past, but to the future. No matter how difficult the past was, It should be overcome. Not that we should forget, no, but we should learn from the lessons of history and build a new world. There is only one way to do this. In the interests of saving the German people, unite all the progressive German forces and actively oppose Hitler, seeking by all means to overthrow him and to end the war. This conversation and the deep concern about the fate of the German people and the future of Germany made a strong impression on Paulus. The meeting with Pieck shook the Field Marshal's ideological position, prompting him to look at the world through different eyes. This conversation, Paulus later recalled, was the first signal for we generals to go beyond the narrow confines of purely military thinking and to begin dealing with the political issues. Conversations with Paulus became more and more confidential and frank. Once he and Adam were offered a walk into the forest, located about 15 kilometres from Suzdal. "We want to show you a real Russian forest," said the head of the camp, holding out birch barks to them. "I advise you to give some rest to your nerves, to forget about the war, if possible," he remarked playfully. After a half-hour ride in a jeep on a country road, we found ourselves away from real life. We forgot, it seemed, that somewhere the war was rumbling. The August sun was shining unusually bright in the middle of the sky. We often came across mushrooms. With some child immediacy, Paulus rejoiced at every find. Dressed in a quilted jacket over his uniform, at that moment he looked like a peaceful rural bookkeeper or teacher, not a military commander who had commanded elite units of the Nazi Wehrmacht. And it was hard to imagine that he was one of the authors of the vicious plans for Barbarossa. The mushroom walk did the trick. Paulus's cheeks turned pink, and he unusually rejoiced. 2 hours later we came to a clearing. A natural environment, along with a rather substantial lunch of stew and an unusual situation. All this affected the Field Marshal in the most unexpected and beneficial way. He stood up, walked away, lit a cigarette, and lay down on the grass, his arms outstretched. I sat on a stump not far from him. "Now that I am going through difficult days," said Paulus after a long silence, "it is a great comfort to me to think that my wife is alive and well. I am so grateful for the letter delivered by your colleagues, and for those few lines written by her hand. It was truly a knightly gesture of them." The story of Paulus's wife's letter was related in our previous video. We soon found ourselves talking about Hitler. I spoke out more than energetically. Then the Field Marshal spoke. "I often met with him, and I think I know him well. He is a neurotic, but he has a phenomenal memory. He knows the numbers of all divisions and even many regiments in various sectors of the front, the names of almost all the generals. A map of the front is always there before his eyes. But all his abilities serve a criminal purpose. His energy and will are directed against the interests of the nation. He is extremely subjective in his assessments, and he does not listen to any reasonable advice. A fanatic and a maniac. After all, he estimated the military potential of Russia at least 2 times lower than it really was, and under his influence we were all completely wrong. And those who saw the truth were afraid to express it. He didn't even want to listen to timid objections. Those who objected or doubted fell out of favour with all the ensuing consequences. But this is about military power. As for the political power of the Soviets, their influence and authority among the people, he doesn't get it at all. He doesn't understand the soul of a modern Russian man, and none of us, in essence, understood it. Some judged her according to Dostoevsky, but now I read How Steel Was Tempered, and thought, if back there we could have imagined that there were many such Korchagins in the Red Army, significant changes would have been made to our calculations. Tell me one thing, Field Marshal. I'm sure there are a lot of smart people among the German generals, Do they all blindly and fanatically obey this semi-literate monster? Yes, for many his strategy seemed adventurous. But he began to win, and then the voices of the disaffected subsided. He tried to make Germany great, and he succeeded, at least before the Eastern Campaign, and everyone liked it. After a pause he added with sarcasm, "In the first months of the war, your propaganda addressed in its leaflets to German workers and peasants dressed in soldiers' uniforms, urging them to lay down their arms and cross over to the Red Army. I read your flyers. How many men have come to you? Just a bunch of deserters? Traitors are in every army, including yours. This does not mean or prove anything. And if you want to know who supports Hitler the most, these are our workers and peasants. It was they who brought him to power and proclaimed him leader of the nation. It was because of him that people from the lower classes of the society became the new gentlemen. It can be seen that your theory of class struggle does not always prove correct. And it's not true that he is a semi-literate monster. The Fuehrer knows philosophy. He was an artist once. He loves music. Even on tense days he takes time to listen to Wagner. In addition, he loves flowers and animals." "And yet he is a monster, a man-hater, Field Marshal," I objected vehemently. "It is on his order the terrible crimes are committed. You can't deny it. Now about the traitors. After all, those who came to us from units of the Wehrmacht are not traitors, but true patriots of the German people. They found courage, risking their lives and the lives of loved ones, to initiate the struggle for the liberation of the homeland from Nazism. As for the rare traitors in our country, what can be said? These are renegades, degenerates, and most often cowards or criminal elements. You mentioned the workers and peasants. No, it was not they who brought your Fuehrer to power. The owners of the concerns did this. You know the names: Tyson, Krupp, Flick, and the like. It is with their money that Nazism has grown. Goebbels' false propaganda did the rest. But genuine patriots are those who continue fighting against Hitler. It is they who fill the concentration camps, and they preserve the dignity of the German people. And the future is theirs. As for Hitler and his gang, they are a disgrace to the German nation. Their names will be cursed by history." "Yes," said Paulus thoughtfully. "These people from the SS really do dirty deeds. But Hitler is responsible for everything. He alone, for everything from beginning to end. Now he is dragging the whole nation into the abyss. If he could leave, go to the Elbe Island, or even to St. Helena. But he will not leave, even if he likes to imitate Napoleon. This is our misfortune. The end of Germany is inevitable. The only question is time. Germany will perish because of him. This is fate." July 1944, Paulus definitely turns. According to Paulus, an important factor in his joining the anti-fascist movement was due to the fact that he received new information about Nazi atrocities in the occupied territories and the inhuman treatment of Soviet prisoners of war. But the main trigger for this decision were the events following the July 20, 1944 attempt by Field Marshal Wetzleben, Generals Beck, Feldgibel, Olbricht and Colonel von Stauffenberg to overthrow Hitler. All these men were known personally to the Field Marshal, and the news of their murder after their failed attempt moved Paulus deeply. "Well," he reasoned, "let us suppose that because we are in captivity we don't know much. We get one-way information. We are not aware of the realities of the German army and people. But these men, they are there, in the Reich, in the headquarters and the General Staff, where everybody knows and sees everything. They are serious people. And if today they see that eliminating Hitler as the only way out, then indeed this must be so. And this is precisely what the National Committee Free Germany and the League of German Officers have been calling for over a year. One can hardly agree with every line of the program of the National Committee, but in the main they are right, Hitler must go and give way to a new leadership that will end the war. There is no doubt about that now. However, the decisive role in the completion of the ideological revolution of Paulus was, of course, played by the major victories of the Red Army in 1943 to 1944. It was they who in many ways determined the final transition of Paulus to the path of the anti-fascist struggle. At the end of July 1944, at the request of the Free Germany Committee and the League of German Officers, Paulus was transferred to the camp of Tomilino, closer to Moscow. The Field Marshal was now ready to make a decisive change. He decided to join the anti-Hitler struggle led by these two organizations. This is what he wrote about such a fundamental decision. The development of military events until the summer of 1944 allowed me to realize that Hitler did not intend to learn from a situation that had become hopeless, and that therefore he was forcing the German people into an unimaginable catastrophe. In addition, I had the opportunity to get a more complete picture of the systematic atrocities and measures to exterminate the populations of occupied regions, which were carried out by Hitler's orders. It became clear to me that Hitler could no longer win the war, but he also should not win it. That would be in the interests of humanity and the German people. So now I came to the conclusion that it was important to end the war on tolerable conditions, and to encourage all forces hostile to Nazism to unite and show a strong front, to definitely end the struggle and avoid a terrible final catastrophe. On the 8th of August 1944, Field Marshal Paulus discarded the more or less neutral attitude he had shown for more than a year. In the evening he spoke on the Free Germany radio station and announced his entry into the anti-fascist organization. Recent events made Germany continuing the war equivalent to a meaningless sacrifice. For Germany the war is lost. The country found itself in this situation as a result of the state and military leadership of Adolf Hitler. Some of Hitler's representatives abhor the methods being used to deal with populations in occupied areas with the disgust of every real German, and thus provoke angry reproaches against us all over the world. If the German people themselves do not renounce these actions, they will be forced to bear full responsibility for them. Germany must renounce Adolf Hitler and establish a new state power that will end the war and create conditions for our people to establish peaceful, even friendly relations with our current opponents. This performance of Paulus made a deep impression on those who managed to hear him in Germany or in Wehrmacht units. In a report, the head of the Reich Main Security Office, Himmler's deputy Ernst Kaltenbrunner, immediately reported the details to Reichsleiter Bormann. It made such a stunning impression on the Reich leadership that the Foreign Intelligence Section was entrusted with identifying his voice signature on the appeal for joining the Free Germany organization, as well as the signatures of other German generals who had also joined. Their authenticity was established. Paulus's family, his wife, son and daughter, was invited to publicly condemn the Field Marshal's act and to renounce his name. They resolutely refused to comply and were subjected to restrictions of rights, surveillance, loss of pension, and a month later Elena Constance was imprisoned in a concentration camp. On the 14th of August 1944, Field Marshal Paulus announced his entry into the League of German Officers. On the 8th of December 1944, 50 German prisoner of war generals gathered in the dacha near Moscow where Paulus lived. The meeting was chaired by General Seydlitz. Following a report on the situation at the front and in Germany, an official appeal to the people and the Wehrmacht was adopted, the draft of which was compiled by Field Marshal Paulus. Published in Pravda on the 15th of December 1944, here is what the appeal said. Germans, burdened with grave concern for the future of the people, for our beloved homeland, and for the existence of Germany, we, German generals, together with many hundreds of thousands of soldiers and officers in Russian captivity, are turning to you, German men and women, at this crucial hour. With the deepest concern, we are following your hopeless efforts in the bloody defensive battles, your superhuman tension, work, and ever-increasing hardships. All our people are now completely plunged into a devastating war. On all fronts our men bleed, from the elderly to the adolescents. And in the homeland, women and children suffer from the ever-increasing bombing of the enemy and languishing under the weight of excessive work. Never before has a war brought such indescribable disaster to our country. The hour of the final collapse is approaching in the face of the overwhelming superiority of the united forces of our opponents. Adolf Hitler brought Germany to such a position. The result of this political and military leadership of Adolf Hitler are millions of victims who are homeless, families are destroyed, famine, cold and disease loom threateningly. Despite this, Hitler wants to continue the war. Himmler and Goebbels paint all kinds of horrors about the revenge of enemies, about the imaginary Bolshevik terror, about the enslavement of our entire people and their hopeless future. They appeal to national feelings and love for the fatherland, forcing the German people to fight desperately until self-destruction. The suicidal continuation of this war, which has become meaningless, serves only to save Hitler and his regime. That is why the SS and Nazi Party have seized the main leadership posts. But our people must not perish. Therefore, we must immediately end the war. Of course, our future will not be easy. We will work, rebuild, but before us, the road of recovery will open again. Instead of terror, arbitrariness and racial hatred, law, order and humanity will prevail. Instead of endless disasters and horrors, peace will come. Every year, our zeal and goodwill will bring us along a new path towards a day when the free and equal German people will take their place among all other peoples. German people, rise against Hitler and Himmler, against their destructive regime. In unity lies your strength. Your hands are weapons. Free yourself from this criminal state leadership. Germans, in a courageous struggle, restore the honor of the German name before the entire world. And no, nobody forced the generals to sign and publish this letter. They were not tortured or starved into submission. The letter was the result of the awakening of their consciousness. The first to sign this appeal was Marshal Paulus, a man whose name had previously been linked to the criminal fascist clique and the implementation of its monstrous plans for humanity. As the Field Marshal later recalled, although the Free Germany Committee did not succeed in ending the war as soon as possible, its principles became the basis for the new democratic Germany and for further preservation of peace, as well as the understanding of the heavy responsibility and guilt that we Germans assumed as a result of our insidious attack and the war of aggression against the USSR. The thoughts of the former Wehrmacht Field Marshal were now aimed at dealing with the past and helping the German people draw the right conclusions for their future.